Call this special meeting on April 30th to order. Please stand. Mr. James, if you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So Asperrin with the roll, please.
Mr. Arnold.
Here.
Mrs. Campo.
Here.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
Here.
Mr. James.
Here.
Mr. Koss.
Here.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Here.
Mr. Zuber. Mayor Zilka.
Here.
Law Director Lieberman.
Here.
Finance Director Presley. Public Works Director Wrights.
Thank you. Mr. Zuber had a commitment, and the Finance Director and the Public Works Director, there is no need for him to be at this special meeting this evening. With that, we do have a public hearing, and I will turn that over to Mrs. Fenderbosh. It deals with the amendment to Planning and Zoning Code Section 1244, 1250, and 1264, distribution and fabrication assembly. Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anytime that there's a change in a planning zoning code, there's always a public hearing, and that's what we're having now. This has already been before council one time before this, because 30 days after the first reading is when you have your second hearing, and then there will be a call for a vote. Basically what this is about adding a distribution and fabrication / assembly to the existing code for business districts. And when you look on your papers under temporary ordinance number 11061, you'll see that it is a conditional use in a B2. That's a business district. And conditional use means that any time that any business would want to have fabrication or distribution assembly, they would need to come before this body, as they would need to come before planning. So there is oversight. So first thing that's going to happen is that we're asking for distribution in a wholly enclosed building be added. Distribution facility would be distribution handling of goods and materials in a clean and non-intrusive manner. And then fabrication assembly would be defined as fabrication and assembly operation of goods and materials in a clean and non-intrusive manner. In order to do this, there's going to be needing to have a change in our coding numbers and letters, and that will take place by the coding company that we hire. If you turn your page to the next section, you'll notice that under 1250.03A2, there's regulations for conditional uses in business and industrial districts, and once again, we are adding it. And if you continue to move down to supplemental regulations for specific uses, again, distribution must meet the performance standards of the code section 1246.05, no outdoor storage of any kind, including materials, goods, and products, including but not limited to fenced areas, storage buildings, trailers, vans, semi-trailers. No vehicles used in transportation of goods shall be stored at the site. No fleet vehicles shall be stored at the site. Shall not generate noise beyond the premises at levels higher than those of permitted use. Location does not impede vehicular and pedestrian traffic flow and safety. And then you speak about the fabrication assembly side. It must meet the performance standards of Code Section 1246.05. And again, you're going through the very same things about what cannot be stored outside. There cannot be any vehicles used in transportation of goods, no fleets, and the noise generation cannot go beyond the highest level of those that are permitted, and the location does not impede any vehicles or pedestrian traffic flow. Then at the very bottom of the page is Schedule 1264.03, which has to do with off-street parking spaces required. Fabrication assembly, one space per 500 square feet of floor area. And that's basically what it is. This is for a very clean operation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions in the public hearing dealing with the code changes? Mr. Koss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Council President. Mrs. Fenderbosh, this passed through planning. What was the vote, and were there any questions or concerns from any member of the Planning Commission?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. There were a lot of questions, and it passed 100%. There's nobody that was voting against it. They believed that this would open up an opportunity for additional business growth and economic development. What was the key part of why it passed through planning was that any business in the future that would have to come, that would want to go through this process, would have to come to planning and to city council, so you have oversight.
Okay. I got one more question.
Go ahead, Mr. Cuss.
Yeah, this is going to number 3 on both the distribution and fabrication, where it talks about no vehicles used in transportation of goods. I could see that relating to semi-trucks, but was there any consideration given to company vans and such, which could be involved in transportation of goods?
Well, that's answered by number 4. No fleet vehicles shall be stored on site. Therefore, no company vehicles can be stored there, and no vehicles used in the transportations can be stored there. Will there be transportation? Of course, there will be transportation, but they won't be stored there.
Okay.
So it'll be a clean parking lot. When people go home at night, there'll be an empty parking lot.
Okay.
Mayor?
Thank you. When the predecessor, the drug mail order place was approved about 15 years ago, there was a very liberal interpretation of our code. And when this was reviewed again, it was determined that fabrication was really not allowed by the code. And the concern was that we had to be more specific to protect the residential area. So this is why we're recommending the change. I think this is the wiser way to go, because we are strictly limiting this so-called assembly or fabrication to this kind of production to make sure we don't end up with some type of industrial place which would require trucks and vehicles and delivery. The delivery vehicles here are going to be nothing different than what you might get for someone from Federal Express or whatever, the mail truck, or a number of other delivery services that do come in your neighborhood each day. So because of the very small nature of the product itself, you're not going to get the large semis, etc., and there are going to be fewer trucks going in and out than you would in a traditional assembly. So this is tightened up, and with the help of the law director and Mrs. Boer, I think this is a code change that really specifically allows this business to be here, and it will not be intrusive to the adjoining residential area.
Further comments? That will close the hearing, and we will go to the 2 items that are on the legislation part. Clerk will read temporary legislation 11,061, please.
An ordinance to amend Planning and Zoning Code Section 1244, 1250, and 1264, distribution and fabrication / assembly in a business district, and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
Thank you. I move for suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Mr. Rossmarin with the roll, please.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Campo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
I move for passage of temporary legislation 11061.
Discussion?
Yes, I think we had a very thorough discussion beforehand describing what distribution and fabrication would be, and that this would be a conditional use.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Rossmarin with the roll, please.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Campo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes.
If the clerk will read temporary legislation 11,089, please.
An ordinance awarding a contract for the Curtis Road Sewer Separation Project and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
Thank you. I move for suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Rossmarin with the roll, please.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Campo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
Thank you very much. I move for passage of temporary legislation 11089.
Discussion?
Yes, this is the first reading, but this is not the first time that you've heard the words Curtis Road Sewer Separation Project. I will remind you that back in December, we discussed it within the sewer committee meeting, and then in January, we authorized the mayor to be able to sign loan documents with the state of Ohio. And then later, we had monies that were appropriated into a fund to cover the contract, and now the contracts were bid upon, and through Avon Lake Regional Water, this particular company, Underground Utilities, came forward of Monroeville, Ohio, as the lowest and best responsive bid. At this point in time, it's been brought before council. The reason why I'm asking for this to be added to a special meeting of council and the first reading and asking for a vote is that, look outside, it is construction season. The total amount of this contract is in the sum of $1,857,352, with $479,266.78 being the city's portion and $1,378,085.22 being Avon Lake Regional Water's portion. Additionally, a 10% contingency allowance will be added to each entity's portion in the event an unforeseen circumstance arises that would cause the contractor to incur additional materials and/or labor in completing the project. Also, there's a performance bond that the contractor shall furnish his good and sufficient performance bond in the amount of $1,857,352 to the satisfaction of Mayor Zilka and approved as to form by the Law Director Lieberman, conditioned to ensure faithful performance of the contract, thereby awarded and completion of the work free and clear of all claims and encumbrances. The contractor shall deposit and keep in force and effect on file with said Director of Finance, Presley, a memoranda of policies of insurance in the amounts and under the conditions set forth in the specifications of the contract documents. The Director of Finance will write a certificate from the Public Works Director and Avon Lake Regional Water that the construction has been completed to full satisfaction of both of them before paying out the final warrant. The mayor shall be and is hereby authorized, if this is passed, to direct his signature to execute the contract, therefore awarding it. The Board of Municipal Utilities has designated wastewater and water-related revenues as sources of payment for the respective components of the project. The ordinance is declared an emergency measure because the emergency is the necessity of implementing the Curtis Road Sewer Separation Project during the summer construction season to provide reliable storm and sanitary sewer systems and be in compliance with the Ohio EPA regulations. Thus is for the public health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Wright's had conversations with the engineer at Utilities. The total amount, 1.8 million plus, is the same, but Mr. Wright's examined the plans, and by the time their conversation was over, the city's share was reduced by $200,000, with the argument being that the utilities would need to pay for 20% of the road work because they were tearing up the road. So that some of that burden was shifted over to them rather than us. So I'm very pleased that Mr. Rice was very vigilant in going over the plans, and so now our cost is just under $480,000 rather than $680,000. And it's his due diligence that allowed that to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Koss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Council President. Realize that Joe's not here tonight, but Mrs. Fenderbosch, if you could talk with him and maybe make an announcement at the at your next sewer committee report for City Council on what the duration of this project is going to be. That way, the residents of Curtis Road will know what they're in for, and the duration of it. I know that the start time is dependent, but at least the duration could be given. Is this a 4-week program, a 6-week, a 2-month?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And the next sewer committee meeting will be May the 10th, the 11th? It's the Thursday.
Thanks.
10th, May 10th.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Ms. Rossmarin at the roll, please.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Campo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes.
Completes the legislation. Any announcements anybody has? Okay, with that, we'll need a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Fenderbosh?
So moved.
Ms. Rossmarin with the roll, please.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Campo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes.
That meeting is concluded. Thank you for viewing us.